Hello and welcome to Japan on a Budget. My name is Jessie and joining me is my husband Adam.
Hi. So in this panel, our goal is to share advice on how to travel to Japan as cheaply as possible, while still enjoying yourself.
Before we begin, we just want to point out that this panel is designed to discuss traveling to Japan during normal times, not during a global pandemic. We do not by any means recommend traveling, whether internationally or not, right now. But if you were to travel, however, travel costs would probably be quite different because many industries such as airlines and hotels are hurting financially right now. So we're going to be using cost estimates from 2019 and assume that travel costs will be eventually adjust back to where they were pre-COVID-19.
Yeah, presumably most of this information will still be relevant in a couple of years when some degree of normalcy is restored to the world.
Now, you may be wondering what experience Adam and I have with traveling to Japan. As you can see here, Adam has visited 5 times, including a study abroad in 2007, and living for nearly a year in the country between 2009 and 2010. I visited 4 times.
So we're not wealthy or anything, and all of our trips were planned generally to try to minimize expenditure. And while I was living there, I was also trying to live within my means of, as I was working basically part-time teaching English. And I got plenty of experience in trying to get by without spending too much. So we've learned a lot about how to travel around Japan while not spending too much money. We just want to share some of that knowledge. So since we're talking about Japan, in most cases we'll be referring to prices in yen, including for things like hotels and food. And so just as an example, here's a graph of the exchange rate from xe.com from the last decade. And the fluctuation in this date range was between about 98 to 115 yen per dollar. The general rough approximation that you can go by is to assume 100 yen per dollar, and you probably won't have too many surprises.
Assuming 100 yen per dollar also makes the math really easy. To get the dollar price for anything, you just take 2 zeros off the end. It's also nice that most Japanese prices do include the 10% sales tax as well. So in this panel, we will be discussing money-saving tips for getting to Japan, getting around Japan once you're there, lodgings or accommodations, food, and shopping.
Alright, so for part 1, we'll be talking about how to get to Japan, and generally this is probably going to be the most expensive part because we're assuming you're going to fly. That's the most common way, and for the last 2 years, the average round trip cost has been about $800, but depending on the season you go in and a number of other factors such as the airport, it can be as low as $500 or as high as $1,500, almost $2,000 even for economy.
No matter what you do, airfare is probably going to be your biggest single expense in your entire Japanese vacation, but there are a few ways to make it a little bit more manageable. Here are the topics we will cover to help reduce your flight costs: date selection, piecemeal booking, catching a special fare deal, and finally using airline miles.
The dates you choose for your trip can definitely make a difference for the cost overall of your trip, not only for airfare, but can also influence cost of hotels or availability of flights or hotels as well.
Generally, peak season for Japan is April through summer. Certain holidays are also big travel holidays for Japanese people. So you should probably avoid visiting during those times unless you're prepared to pay for it. Golden Week is especially difficult. Oban and New Year's Eve can be too. In fact, you should probably just avoid Golden Week
Yeah,
altogether.
Golden Week, you don't want to travel to Japan or in Japan during Golden Week.
Yeah, it's crazy. Try looking for flights in the fall or winter to see if costs are maybe a little lower than average during those times.
Also, early spring is generally not too bad.
When I say piecemeal booking, I mean booking your departure and return flights separately, or even booking different legs of the same flight separately. Many flights from the US, especially those from the East Coast, have a stopover in the Los Angeles airport called LAX airport. So looking at a flight to Los Angeles and then a separate flight from there to Japan could be cheaper than booking it all under one reservation.
There are a lot of factors involved there. So if you do make that kind of reservation, make sure that you leave enough time in between your flights to make sure that you can actually make it there and account for possible delays, reasonable delays, and yeah, if you don't want to miss your connecting flight there.
Right, so let's look at the example here. This example uses flight costs from 2018 that I recorded from a travel booking site using the Orlando airport. So when I simply looked at round-trip flights from Orlando to Tokyo, the cheapest reservation I could find was $1,476. Then I looked at round-trip flights separately from Orlando to Los Angeles and then Los Angeles to Tokyo, and I found one flight from Orlando to Los Angeles that was only $277, and a flight from Los Angeles to Tokyo for $938. So if you add these two flights up, you get $1,215 with only one layover, and that's over $200 cheaper than the direct booking would have been.
It's worth noting that there are some sites that will automatically consider these kinds of scenarios for you. For example, kayak.com. Especially if you're flexible about when you want to travel or when you can travel, there are some special fares that you might be able to catch, and some of these are just airlines making mistakes that somebody will catch, and there are email lists and some other forums and such where people will discuss those kinds of deals. Typically those are very short-lived and you need to find out about them quickly in order to take advantage of them, but sometimes there are just short-term intentional deals offered by the airlines. And so as an example, in 2019, in December, there was a flight that was round trip from Toronto to Narita on ANA, which was only $500. And that's pretty cheap. That's, on the low end of normal, so that would have been a pretty good deal. But usually these sorts of fares, whether they're mistake fares or otherwise intentional discounts, are pretty short-lived and may have limited availability, so you need to get on them fast. So something you may have heard of before, but maybe didn't consider too much if you've been on flights previously, are airline miles programs. And so these actually can be useful to consider, especially if you actually do a lot of flying anyway. So if you do actually have a lot of miles, or if you have a way of accumulating miles, you can use those to book your flights. And this is not entirely free. You do have to pay surcharges, fees, and taxes sometimes. But it's a way to save money, especially if you already have miles or a way to get them.
So, as noted here, we have actually successfully used airline miles to fly a couple of times. In 2016, Adam got very fancy and used airline miles to fly for free on business class to Japan.
Free.
Yeah, it took a long time for him to accumulate that many miles, but that was an intentional thing because he wanted to see what the business class experience was.
I wanted to have that experience at least once.
And in 2019, we managed to use airline miles to cover both of our flights in economy. We had almost enough airline miles accumulated just through normal spending, and then we did purchase a few extra miles, and we had to pay some airline fuel charges. So in the end, we paid about $524 in total to cover our flights for both of us.
It's still a net savings.
Yeah, considering the normal flight cost would have been $800 each, that was a pretty good deal. So there's a few things to know when you're booking your flight using miles. The number of airline miles you will need are going to depend on how long the route is, what class you want to fly, and whether you're flying during peak season or off season. For example, an economy class round-trip flight for All Nippon Airways from anywhere in North America to Japan during peak season would require 60,000 miles. But if you're traveling during off-peak season, you only need 40,000 miles. You will probably need to have all the required airline miles up front. In most cases, you can't pay half cash, half airline miles. That does depend on your airline carrier, though.
And the specific numbers of miles and such also. Each airline has their own scale, basically, for the redemption. They have what's called the redemption mile chart. So if you have almost enough but not quite enough miles to cover your flight, you can actually purchase miles to make up that difference. Of course, it has to be for your specific airline. There are a couple of different ways of going about doing this. Some airlines do have an actual official program that you can use to purchase miles. There are third-party vendors that may not be 100% sanctioned, so it's buyer beware for those cases. But overall, that there's a net possibility that you'll save money by even buying miles to make the number of miles that you actually need to get your ticket.
Another thing to keep in mind about using airline miles is that they often have blackout dates where you can't use them. You can't book your flight using airline miles. So you would have to look at the specific airline you plan to book with and to see what blackout dates there are and to see how many miles you will need. It's probably best to wait to book your hotels and other things until after you have your flight sorted out because of that. And finally...
That's a good idea, just in general, regardless of how you're booking.
Yeah. Make sure you have a flight to get there first,
Yeah.
Then take care of everything else. Finally, airline miles do expire, so keep an eye on that too. So Adam, how do you get airline miles anyways?
So there's a lot of possible complexity and sub-communities on the internet that discuss how to make the most of these systems. So we're going to try to keep it simple here with just a basic summary. But one of the main ways to get miles is to already fly. And especially if you're already flying, you tend to fly on one airline a number of times per year, then you definitely want to make sure that you get a frequent flyer card or membership for that airline. And of course, every airline has their own program, but if you do travel frequently, that's one of the fastest ways to start accumulating miles.
So if you travel frequently for work, see if your employer can enter your frequent flyer number when they book flights for you, so you can earn miles on those work trips. Some airlines also allow family members to transfer miles to other family members, so if you have relatives that travel a lot, you could ask them if they would be willing to transfer some miles to you as well.
Each airline's miles program is independent, but airlines participate in so-called airline alliances. These include things like Star Alliance, SkyTeam, or the One World Alliance. And these are airlines that work with each other to some extent. Oftentimes, you might be able to actually use miles from one airline in an alliance to book a flight on a partner airline. However, it's relatively rare to be able to actually transfer miles directly between frequent flyer programs, even within one alliance. So it's definitely, say for example, if you really want to go to Japan, ANA is part of Star Alliance, and ANA being All Nippon Airways, Japan Airlines or JAL is part of One World. Yeah. And so, if you probably want to try to fly on airlines that are part of either of those programs, for example, of course there are other airlines based in in the U.S. that also have international flights to Japan. So the what you can do with miles in a given program based on airline partners and such is also something to consider there.
So the other way to earn miles is by using a credit card as well.
Yeah, so many credit cards have associated reward programs where you earn points for purchases, and there are a few different credit card programs in particular that are attractive for either purchasing flights directly through a credit card company or bank with the points, or transferring points to airlines. And a lot of people who try to who are enthusiastic about making the most of these systems will try to accumulate points and then transfer them, and that's the route that I've also used before. And so we're not saying you should go out and make a bunch of buy a yacht on your credit card or something, but if you have recurring purchases that are things you would buy anyway, that things like paying rent, or even your car payments or things, where over the course of the year this amounts to thousands of dollars. That can actually be quite a large number of points. And another thing to consider is if you're already thinking about getting another credit card, there are potentially and sometimes seasonally pretty large sign-up bonuses that say if you spend $3,000 you get X number of points. There's usually quite a bit, or there can be quite a few points there that can actually worth quite a bit if you then transfer those to airline miles.
So just make sure that you pay off your credit card consistently, of course. Otherwise, you'll probably end up paying more in interest than you would save. Then it's not worth it. Yeah. Don't go into credit card debt. But if you're going to be making purchases anyways, like Adam said, for recurring fees or bills that you have, then it's a good way to earn miles. Okay, so one way or another, you've booked your flight to Japan. Most flights to Japan land in either the Haneda or Narita airports in Tokyo, but chances are at some point you're going to want to leave the airport, and you may even want to visit some other cities while you're in Japan. So let's talk about getting around once you're there.
So how are you going to travel within a city? I like walking. I find that walking is a good way to see things, and it also happens to be free, relatively. I mean, burn some calories.
Yep. Walking's good. Walking can be a bit slow, and the city of Tokyo covers 240 square miles, so walking might be a little too slow depending on where you're going. So what else?
So there are some cities have places where you can rent bikes. There are also, of course, like there are here in the U.S. now, also bike share programs in some places. Overall, biking is much more common of a way to get around in Japan than it is here, and so their cities tend to be a little bit more bike friendly, and overall it's more common for drivers to see cyclists, and it's in most places not taboo to ride your bike on the sidewalk either, and people drive also a lot slower, and of course there are many more places to park a bike, as in the picture here. That's real. That's just some train stations have bike parking lots that just like go off into the horizon.
Right. So Japan is generally more bike friendly than it is here in the U.S. But some people might not be able to do all that exercise, or they might be carrying heavy things, or they might need to get there kind of in a hurry. So what's the final way to get around Japan?
You've probably heard that Japan has a lot of trains. So how do you pay for your train fare? It's worth noting that first that many subway systems in Japan, and this includes Tokyo, Osaka, and Nagoya, have distance-based fares that are based entirely just on your entry and exit station. And so although you can actually go and buy a ticket at a ticket machine every single time you need to get on a train, the most convenient, fastest way to get through the gate is with an IC card. These are contactless cards that you basically just hold up to sensor at the gate and walk through. There are a couple of programs, for example, around Tokyo, the Suica and Passmo, that really over the last 10 or so years have become nearly identical and provide basically the same function and advantages. But you can get sometimes a small discount if you use on the fare if you use the IC card versus a single-use ticket. But overall, they're just more convenient.
So there's really several benefits to having an IC card. As Adam mentioned, it's faster and easier just to recharge your IC card every once in a while instead of having to buy a separate fare every single time you get on and off the train. And even just figuring out what your fare is supposed to be can be kind of overwhelming when you're standing in the train station and looking at this giant map with all the prices on it.
And trying to read the city names.
Yes. Most of the maps...
Or stop names.
Yeah, most of the maps will have them written out in English, but it can be, kind of much when you're trying to get someplace in a hurry. Plus, if you decide to change which station you're getting off at spur of the moment, or if you miss your stop, your IC card will automatically adjust the fare that's charged to it. But if you have a regular ticket, you'd have to go to a fare adjustment counter once you do get off. Which can be time-consuming as well.
So IC cards can also be used effectively as rechargeable debit cards, similar to if you have a credit card that has the tap feature. They're often accepted at convenience stores, especially major chains in big cities. The lockers in train stations that you used to have to put a 100 yen or 500 yen coins in. Now also will accept payment or reserving a locker with your Suica card. Also in train stations, vending machines often will accept them as payment. And if you have a phone that has NFC features, you can also use the Suica or Passmo app to effectively just use your phone as a card instead of the actual physical card.
And Adam, you said before that Suica and Passmo are virtually identical. Are there any differences between them?
Generally, whenever one of them offers a new feature, it's basically copied by everyone else, and now also all of the card networks are integrated. So anywhere that accepts one will also accept another, basically. One of the main advantages that exists right now is for Suica, which supports Apple Pay, and so you can recharge your card balance actually using Apple Pay, and especially if you have an Apple Watch, we found via our friend in our last trip he saved a lot of time just recharging his Suica balance via his Apple Watch, while we're on the escalator, as opposed to us having to recharge our card at the card charging station when we get down the escalator. Or similar, but
because he had the Suica app on his phone, that also went over to his watch, and he could use his watch as a virtual card as well.
Yeah. Yeah, so he would just hold his watch up to the sensor, and
Yeah.
which was pretty nifty.
Yeah.
And so technically also Suica supports Google Pay, but you have to have a Japanese Google account, and there are more restrictions there. It's easier to get Apple Pay working with Suica.
Yeah.
And just, the other differences between the cards, well, I like Suica because I like the penguin mascot. But
So other than getting an IC card, another way you can save money on subways and local trains is to look into special discount tickets. Sometimes discounts are offered around holidays for purchasing a combo ticket, or some railway lines might even offer discounts exclusively for tourists. For example, the Tokyo Metro duration discount ticket, which is only sold at airports and certain hotels.
when we talk about combo tickets, as an example, sometimes you can get when you're coming from an airport, such as especially Narita, which is outside Tokyo. You can buy a ticket for the Narita Express that also includes a duration ticket for the Tokyo Metro. And so with the duration tickets, you pay one rate for basically all you can ride for a given duration. The all you can ride is Nori Hodai. And so, for example, a 24-hour discount ticket for Tokyo Metro is 800 yen. And so that gives you as many rides on the Tokyo Metro trains for 24 hours after you initially use it. And so the normal fares start at 170 yen per trip. And so if you're going to actually be doing a lot of riding around in the subway in a given 24 hours, you can actually save a lot of money by getting one of these discount tickets on a particular day. It's also worth noting that Tokyo actually has two different subway systems, and that it's not like all the trains in the Tokyo area become available to you with just this, but with just the 800 yen. But even just say Tokyo Metro operates a lot of lines.
Yeah. And just to be clear, the time limit on the duration ticket starts counting down from the time you first use the ticket, not from the time that you purchase the ticket. So you can buy it in the airport and then hold on to it until the day that you're going to be on the subways all day, and then start using it at that point.
And other cities have different deals, so something to look into, depending on wherever you're going, basically.
Yeah. Okay, so those are your basic, fairly affordable options for traveling within one city. So now let's look at traveling between different cities. From most expensive to least expensive, and coincidentally from fastest to slowest, you have domestic flights, trains, and buses.
So after you've spent 13 or more hours on a plane flying from the US to Japan, perhaps you don't necessarily want to get back in a plane to fly somewhere else within Japan, but depending on how far away your ultimate destination is within the country, a plane may be the fastest and most reasonable way to get there, as opposed to, getting off your plane and then spending 20 hours on a train.
The two main domestic airlines in Japan are All Nippon Airways or Japan Airlines, so ANA or JAL. Both of these airlines offer discounts exclusively for foreign tourists. You literally must have a passport from another country in order to use these tickets. And you have to present an international plane ticket back to your home country in order to use these discounts. So most of these discounted domestic flights are less than $150 each. You are restricted to certain routes. Not every city you might want to visit might have a discounted domestic flight to there, but generally the route selection's pretty good. Most of the major cities are going to be available.
Of course, you want to make sure you book within at least 3 days in advance. It's probably not going to be an issue for most people. But yeah, of course, the farther ahead, probably the better.
Right. So when you go to get on a domestic flight, make sure that you have your international return ticket with you, like accessible in your carry-ons, because when you go to check any luggage, if you show your international flight ticket, you'll actually be allowed to use the international baggage rules instead of the domestic baggage rules, which means you get 2 checked bags up to 50 pounds each for free.
Japan Rail operates the largest network of trains in Japan, and they operate most of the routes that go between major cities. And they also offer what's called the JR Pass, and maybe you've heard of this, which is basically also an all-you-can-ride discount ticket that's offered only to, temporary visitors, so basically foreign tourists, that you actually have to buy before you get there.
It's a little bit like the Tokyo Metro's duration discount tickets that we mentioned before. You pay a flat fee for the ticket, and then you use it for as many rides as you want within the ticket's expiration period. You can get a JR Pass for 7, 14, or 21 days, and it covers any rides on the Tokyo monorail, some of the Aomori railway lines, local JR buses, and all JR trains nationwide except for the Nozomi and Mizuho Shinkansen.
So the national JR Pass for 7 days for an adult ticket is $285, which might seem like a lot, but that covers most of the country, basically the entire country. And so just as an example, a typical Shinkansen ticket between Tokyo and Osaka is about $90 each way, not on the Nozomi. And if you're doing a round trip, then and if you're also going to be on any other JR trains in between there, say if you're going between Osaka and Kyoto, for example, then the rail pass could be worth considering.
Plus, it's really convenient as well because you won't need to be buying separate tickets every time you get on a train. So it's kind of like the IC cards in that sense that, it's one ticket, you carry it with you, use it everywhere.
So as I mentioned, you actually have to buy the JR Pass before you get to Japan. So actually you need to purchase it at least 3 months in advance because they have to actually mail you the voucher, and then when you take that voucher with you on your trip and exchange it at a JR counter when you want to activate it, and then the duration starts from when you actually activate it. And there's not every JR station can exchange the vouchers, but there's most of the vendors that sell the rail passes have a list of the stations that do the voucher exchange.
Yeah, the website we have linked here, and there's many others you can look at, will have a lot of information about the ins and outs of using the JR Pass correctly. So, buses. I've only been on local buses in Japan, but Adam has some experience doing longer distances on buses.
Yeah, so my year when I basically lived there, I was in Okazaki, the city of Okazaki in Aichi Prefecture, and so a few times I went between Okazaki and Tokyo on buses, and so in my experience, don't expect to get a whole lot of sleep if you're on a highway bus. So I'm talking about overnight trips, so longer trips between cities, and yeah. So on my trips, I ended up basically being dumped out at Tokyo Station at 5 a.m. and found that the Yamanote line is actually pretty empty at 6 a.m. on a Saturday, which was an interesting experience. But buses are pretty reasonable for shorter distances between cities that are closer together, or if you really don't like sleeping anyway. And sometimes they're the only option between cities that don't have convenient rail links, and so those are rare, but they exist, basically. Yeah, we didn't talk about buses before with local transport, but obviously cities also have buses.
In conclusion, the buses are extremely slow, and as Ed indicated, they're not for everyone, but they are technically the cheapest way to get from one city to another. So if you really want to go to different cities and don't have a lot of money, then buses might be your answer.
Yeah, and so our example here, the Shinkansen is not exactly the cheapest way to travel, and so the bus is half the cost, but probably a quarter of the comfort. So even though, yeah, something to consider. So you're in the country and you can get around, but where are you going to stay? So we're going to talk about a bit about accommodations and considerations when you're planning your trip.
So there are, of course, really fancy hotels in Japan, just like in most countries. We're not going to be talking about the fancy hotels. We're going to be talking about slightly more affordable places, starting with the nicest while still being fairly reasonable options and working our way down in price. Like most things in life, you get what you pay for. So the cheaper you go, the less luxurious and comfortable your lodgings may be. So, you know, that's something that you just have to decide for yourself. So, business hotels. Japanese business hotels are very much like American hotels in terms of basic amenities. You get a private room and you get a private bathroom. There's usually a TV, a mini fridge, an electric tea kettle, and a small desk. The one big difference is that the beds in the rooms themselves are typically a lot smaller than what you would find in America.
So, I mean, think of something like Hampton Inn or Holiday Inn Express, and then scale it down a little bit. They're also a little cheaper, though. So these are called business hotels because they're generally aimed at business travelers, so people who are generally traveling for work and not with large families, and so the rooms can actually be a little bit smaller and on the basic side. But as I just mentioned, they're actually surprisingly reasonably priced in many cases, ranging from often on the low end 6,000 yen to, for a much larger room, say a large double or even a triple, 15,000 yen, so about $150. So there are also some hotels in the business hotel category that actually might offer some rooms that are even cheaper than 6,000 yen, and so they might cut out some things like the private baths. You might have a toilet in your room, but the shower is going to be down the hallway. Those aren't all that common in the business hotel class, but there are some places that will have a few rooms that if you're really looking for something cheaper, you might be able to reserve one of those.
So next on our list of options are hostels and ryokan. Ryokan are traditional Japanese inns, which might be a really fun experience while you're in the country. The reason we have ryokan and hostels listed together is that both of them usually feature private rooms, but shared bathrooms or bathing areas.
So hostels exist, of course, in countries around the world, but they're also in Japan. And similar to in other places, hostels in Japan are often have smaller rooms. Ryokan on the lower end of the price spectrum may also have pretty small rooms. Overall, a ryokan is going to have a traditional tatami mat floor, and you will probably sleep on a futon mattress on the floor, and you'll probably also need to fold up the mattress during the day to make space in your room, because your room might actually be pretty small. Some hostel style hotels will also have tatami floors. So our example image here from the unfortunately now closed Aizuya Inn. This was actually a medium-sized room that obviously there wouldn't be a whole lot of space for rummaging around in your luggage if you didn't fold up your mattress during the day. Hostels will often have bunk beds. So even if you have your own private room, if you have 2 people or 2 beds, then they'll have bunk beds. The hostels don't have a lot of amenities, but oftentimes they'll have a communal space, sort of like a lounge, and there may also be some cooking facilities as well that are shared in hostels.
So due to the small space and very bare bones accommodations, hostels and some of the cheaper ryokans can be really affordable. You can find ones as low as 4,000 yen a night, which is only like $40.
And if you opt for dorm-style accommodation, which hostels often offer, can be actually substantially cheaper than that, going down to 2,000, 2,500 yen per night then. But of course, the ryokan's a pretty broad category, so they span the whole spectrum from basically resorts, especially around areas with hot springs, or in places like Kyoto, where there's a lot of tourism and the strong traditional vibe, basically. But you can find much cheaper ryokan style accommodations. However, they're often small family-run establishments that you might need to use Japan-specific booking sites to find, such as Rakuten. So you may have heard of capsule hotels. And so what's a capsule hotel? These were originally designed to be cheap and relatively space efficient places to stay for business people who may have had too much to drink, who may have missed the last train home and needed to stumble into somewhere to stay for a while that wasn't on the side of the road. But they've overall been, they've had so now they're popular with other groups of people as well, for a variety of reasons. But on a basic level, you basically get a bed and you sleep in a box. Sometimes there's even a TV on the wall, if you're lucky.
Yeah. Since capsule hotels really kind of originated for businessmen, many of them originally were men only. That's not quite as common today. But if you're a lady, you should probably check ahead, make sure that you're not accidentally reserving yourself a spot in a men's only building. Most capsule hotels are still segregated by gender, though. So they'll have like men on one floor and women on another floor.
Or otherwise they'll have buildings that are adjacent to each other, where one is in one building and the other's in the other building. Oftentimes the same company that operates one will, for men, will also have one for women somewhere else. If
nearby.
Not in the same building, but nearby.
Yeah. So if you're traveling in a mixed group, just keep in mind that you will have to probably split up when it comes time to actually go to bed. So Adam, you actually stayed at a capsule hotel once. What was it like?
That was actually just for fun rather than necessity, and it wasn't the cheapest either, because it was just outside of Shinjuku Station. Since I'm a compact person, it really wasn't all that uncomfortable for me. But I was kind of fascinated that the place that I went to was kind of like a paradise for drunk middle-aged men, because it had a bar. You've got the it's actually kind of a decent shared bathing space, but there was a massage area. There's a restaurant. It's everything you need for
Recovering.
I don't know. I guess I don't know. It was a fun little experience, but so the proximity to Shinjuku Station meant that it definitely wasn't the cheapest accommodation I could have selected at the time. Mm-hmm. But not every hotel also, or not every hostel has a bar in the middle either. So.
Next up is internet cafes.
So another option you may have heard of for accommodations is to stay overnight at a internet cafe, or what's more often called a manga cafe. So these started out as a place for people, especially in cities, to get out of their apartments while having a computer in a booth, or having access to a fairly extensive actual manga library, and so this would be a place for people to go and relax. However, at some point people started staying long enough, playing online games, for example, that they would end up staying overnight, and so then these places adapted and started having rates for overnight stays. Started bringing in amenities that would be oriented towards people who were basically doing that and staying overnight. And some places even installed things like showers and laundry.
But even internet cafes that have services for overnight visitors are still not really intended for overnight visitors, to sleep there at least. Often the private booths will have a chair rather than anything you can actually lay down on.
Sometimes there's a couch.
Yeah, but not always. So you might, if you're trying to sleep, you might end up sleeping on the floor, bare floor.
Or in a chair.
Or in the chair.
Yeah.
So they're not particularly comfortable to stay at, and we don't really recommend doing this unless you're extremely strapped for cash.
Yeah, so because they are so cheap, in some areas, they also attracted people who are homeless, who are living and possibly working out of them, and so because of that, some places don't offer overnight stays anymore, and overall it was relatively rare, but yeah, so it's not everywhere. Not everywhere has that option.
So the use of internet cafes by homeless people has actually been reflected in anime a few times. If you saw the movie Weathering with You, you might remember a few scenes from the beginning when the main character, who was a high schooler, was trying to live in Tokyo on his own. And the place where he was staying at was an internet cafe. It's hard to see here, but the sign in the background of the upper right screenshot here indicates that the fee for a 12-hour stay is 2,100 yen, so about 21 bucks. The main character from the anime series Charlotte also spent a period of time living in an internet cafe during episode 7. So one other option that adventurous people might be interested in is WWOOFing. Neither Adam and I have done this, so we can't really offer any first-hand experience, but WWOOF stands for Willing Workers on Organic Farms. And what the WWOOF program does is connect visitors to Japan with organic farmers in Japan. The farmers temporarily host the visitors, providing lodging and food, and in exchange the visitors provide labor on the farm. So the exact nature of the work you'd be expected to do depends on each individual farm, what kind of farm you're at. But you'd be living typically in the same house and eating meals with the host. So you kind of get a really authentic living in Japan in a rural area experience.
The organization that coordinates this also operates in other countries as well. There are places in Japan that participate in there though, and even things like tea farms, which is something I actually looked into once. But yeah, they have a website, and if it's something that sounds interesting to you, then check it out.
So now you've arrived in Japan, got into your hotel or other kinds of accommodations, and now you're hungry because traveling takes a lot of energy. So once again, we will be discussing budget-friendly options from most to least expensive, starting with family restaurants or Famiresu, Western fast food joints, Japanese fast food places, convenience stores or kombini, and also we're going to be briefly talking about grocery stores as well.
So first up are family restaurants, otherwise known as Famiresu. These are relatively inexpensive, generally sit-down restaurants, just like you would have here with a diner. And most places have a reasonably sized menu, basically a normal sized menu, similar to what you'd also get at a diner here
If you've ever seen a group of kids hanging out in a restaurant in an anime, and if you've watched anime, you've seen this scene somewhere before. It was most likely supposed to be depicting Famiresu.
Yeah, but basically like when they order only coffee and then hang out there for 3 hours.
Yeah, you have 4 kids around a table and everyone has a soda and maybe one of them has a parfait. That's a Famiresu.
Yeah. And so, for example, Denny's, there's Denny's in Japan, and that's obviously a family restaurant. And so Denny's in Japan is a lot different than it is here, because actually they're owned by the company that operates 7-Eleven there, and it's a whole lot better. The menu is entirely different and has a lot more vegetables, which I'm a big fan of. But there are a lot of other franchises, such as Royal Host, Jonathan's, Coco's, Caesarea, which is actually Italian style. Also Gusto. There's a whole lot of them. Some of them are also regional, but there's a lot.
And the prices at Famiresu are pretty reasonable to begin with. And they also offer combo sets, like pictured here is a combo set from Denny's, and those can be pretty good deals too.
So you can also find places that are fast food that have things that are broadly resemble what you might think of as fast food in America.
So of course there are McDonald's and Burger King in Japan, but there's also Japanese-based franchises that include Mos Burger, Lotterita, Freshness Burger, and even though these restaurants are focused on Western foods such as burgers and fries, they usually do have a few menu items that offer kind of a Japanese twist.
Yeah, they have original takes on
a
lot of these things.
So for example, here we have the a burger from Mos Burger, which features a rice bun, and then a shrimp burger from Lotteria, so they can be a little different.
Of course, while I think that Mos Burger is pretty good, and actually even KFC in Japan I think is actually better than in the U.S. Hopefully you weren't going all the way to Japan to eat fried chicken, and so for there's plenty of variety even among in Japanese style fast food, and these places are usually pretty cheap, and oftentimes even cheaper than your burger joint, and you can easily eat for 600 yen or less for a meal.
So a lot of these places will have like a long counter that you sit at that's right in front of where the food is prepared. There might be a few small private tables, but sometimes there aren't private tables, it's just the counter. And also many of them use vending machines for you to select and pay for your food. So you would go up to the machine and there'll be a button for each menu item and you select what things you want to eat and you put your money in and then you get a ticket and you bring the ticket over to the counter for the chef staff to actually prepare your food.
So the reason for the long table and ticket machine is reducing staff, because if they have just a couple people behind the counter, then they don't have to actually have a bunch of waiters milling around, and then of course reducing a number of staff means reducing cost, which means you can eat for pretty cheap. Japanese fast food comes in a few different broad categories, many of which you've probably heard of. And so one of these categories is the sort of the donburi, example of which would be gyudon, which is basically beef on rice. And there are other kinds of donburi as well, such as chicken on rice, katsudon is pork on rice, and there are a few other varieties of that. There are some very famous gyudon chains such as Yoshinoya, Sukiya, and Matsuya that you'll find everywhere, and so there are some other places that such as kaiten sushi, which is conveyor belt sushi, which you've probably heard of, and kaiten sushi is not only fun but can also be relatively cheap. An interesting thing with kaiten sushi is that oftentimes that there will be multiple colors of plates, and that each color refers to a different price, and so you'll have fancier sushi on on a different color plate than the cheaper sushi, and at the end you take the plates off the belt, and then they total up your meal cost based on the plates that you have in front of you. And of course, Japan is also famous for ramen. And so there are also fancy ramen places that might be like local famous joints, but there are also national chains that are on the more value oriented side of things.
And then there's curry. So of course curry is from India. It's not from Japan, but it's been a part of Japanese cuisine for about going on 100 years now, over 100 years. So it is a big part of Japanese food now, even though it didn't originate there. And Japanese curry is fairly distinct from traditional curry. It tends to be sweeter, less spicy.
Most places will offer a range of, you can select your spice, but I think even on the spiciest end of things, some people, who really, really like spicy food would probably not think it to be very spicy, but so there's a lot of different restaurants in each of these categories, whether, especially even a lot of chains, and so we're only listing a few of the most famous examples here. But of course, don't feel free to just try places that look interesting. So convenience stores, which are also known as konbini, are also another option for getting food, snacks or meals at a decent price. And so some convenience store chains include, of course, 7-Eleven, but also Mini Stop and Lawson, and they all generally have a pretty similar kind of selection. So there's a pretty big array of refrigerated and prepackaged meals, such as bento or onigiri with the rice balls, and even if your hotel doesn't have a microwave, the convenience store staff will often ask you if you want something heated when you buy something that is likely going to need heating, such as a bento.
They also offer hot foods that are usually located up at the front near the register. Kind of like the hot dogs that you find at gas stations, but a lot better. Way better. My favorite food for konbini is the nikuman, which are like little steamed buns that usually have a meat filling inside. And they're really, really delicious, and they only cost $1, so you buy like 2 of those, and I mean that's enough food for me for like a light lunch. And they're really delicious, and also similar to some of the better gas stations that you can find here in America, a lot of konbini in Japan now also offer fresh brewed coffee stations too. So the final possibility for food, cheap food that we're going to mention here is grocery stores. Now, grocery stores won't be cheaper for everything across the board. For example, fresh fruit is probably going to be a little pricey no matter where you go in Japan. However, for some items, a grocery store or supermarket will have the cheapest price, specifically beverages and some snack foods, in our experience, are considerably cheaper at grocery stores than anywhere else.
So many grocery stores also have bakeries, so you can get bread-like items.
Breakfast
which
items.
is basically it could be breakfast, could be lunch, that sort of thing. And similar to convenience stores, also you can get pre-made meals, such as in a bento package. And what was made more famous in the last couple of years, if you're shopping in the evening before the store closes, sometimes the leftover bento will be marked down. Oftentimes 50% or more, to just try to get it out before the end of the night, and actually that whole thing somehow got turned into an anime series about students actually fighting for discounted bento at grocery stores, and they creatively called that show Bento.
Yeah. And we mentioned before that business hotels in Japan often will have a mini fridge and a hot water kettle. So that can really expand your ability to take home and store food from a grocery store and even prepare certain foods. Like you could do instant ramen in your room if you really wanted to, although I think you'd be kind of missing out if you're eating instant ramen throughout your vacation.
Yeah, you can get things that are not much more expensive and probably healthier and higher quality, but yeah.
It's just it is a possibility. Yeah, it's an option. So after all this, if you're lucky, you might have some room left over in your budget to actually buy stuff to take home with you while you're in Japan. So let's talk about some shopping.
So on the cheapest end of things, there's the 100 yen stores, which are basically dollar stores. That's 100 yen store. Chains like Daiso, which is found all over the place. Actually, their Daiso also operates a few stores in California. And so even though they're 100 yen stores, with tax now, actually items start at 110 yen. But most of their every item is some multiple of that. So slightly nicer things might cost 550 yen. But you can find all sorts of small and useful items, and also things that would actually not be bad as souvenirs, such as bowls, decorative bowls, chopsticks or reusable ones, towels, coin purses, fans, and all sorts of things that have Japanese designs on them. And many of these things are also actually made in Japan. There are also things like magnets or keychains and pens and stationery and
yeah, they make good gifts because they're small and they're inexpensive. They're easy to pack. So
yeah.
So by the way, the 100 yen stores, or as they're maybe called 100 yen stores, are also a great place to go if you forgot to pack something for your trip. So like toiletries, toothbrush, or something like that. Because they will carry things like that for personal hygiene. They even
convenience stores also have some.
Yeah. And they'll even carry, like, you could get, dollar underclothes if you need to buy more. So they're good to check out.
And if you're looking for a sort of one-stop shop for all sorts of things, including souvenirs, you might look into Don Quixote, which is a chain. But most of their locations offer a fairly eclectic assortment of items. And how would you describe it?
It's kind of like a department store, but also crossed with a Spencer's, because they have like lots of normal useful items, ranging from dollar store type things all the way up to like appliances for an apartment.
Sometimes there's a supermarket in the basement.
Yeah, but they also have like really weird stuff. For example, when Adam and I went to Japan in 2019. It was like just a month after Emperor Naruhito had succeeded to the throne. And we went into a Donkyu, and they were selling face masks featuring the face of the guy who stood behind the emperor during the Ascension ceremony.
Yeah, they have other things like wacky socks, really wacky socks. Lots of wacky socks.
And
masks,
t-shirts.
Masks, and there's all sorts of stuff.
So they have some like really funny stuff, some really weird stuff.
The smaller stores don't have quite as much, but like the larger ones in Tokyo and Osaka that are multiple floors, they have everything.
Yeah. So as far as souvenirs go, the socks or t-shirts are fine, candy's fine. If you're into trying every flavor of Kit Kat, like I'm kind of obsessed with trying all the Kit Kats. A Donkey is a good place to start because
the ones that have the supermarket floor area at least.
Yeah, which is, most of the ones we've been to do, and they'll have a really wide selection of candy, including every flavor Kit Kat.
It's worth walking through there for the experience anyway. So if you really want to maximize the amount of stuff you can obtain per unit money spent. You can also look for souvenirs in what are broadly known as recycle shops. These are kind of like thrift stores. And the most famous chain is Book Off, which specializes in books and media like CDs, but that also expanded into sub-stores that have other goods, such as Hard Off, Garage Off, and Hobby Off. Also Off Home, which has housewares. You're probably you're probably most likely interested in Book Off and Hard Off. Hard Off has things like electronics. Sometimes they will also have movies, everything from musical instruments to game consoles to cameras.
Yeah. So recycle shops and the off stores can be hit or miss because their selection will depend on just what residents in the local area are trying to get rid of. But sometimes you can find some really cool stuff. For example, we went to a off-house location in Hokkaido, and that particular store had a lot of pre-owned yukata that they were selling for just like $20 each, which could be kind of a cool souvenir if you know the approximate size of the person you're shopping for, or even if they don't plan to wear it, like you hang it up and it's just pretty and cool. So yeah, if you're creative, you can get a lot of neat stuff in these stores that can be used as souvenirs for someone else or for yourself. So if you're looking for anime merch specifically, because of course you are, UFO catchers can be one thing you can look into.
And so these are otherwise known here as crane or claw machines. In Japan, they're known as UFO catchers. They're most often found in arcades, and these can be standalone arcades, be arcades in malls. And so oftentimes they'll have anime figurines or plushies as prizes in at least some machine in a given location. And so some crane machines can have pretty large prizes, and you can something like even an 8th scale figure, and those might cost a little bit more to play, but most of the time it's only 100 yen, so basically $1. And whether you actually can get anything as a souvenir out of that depends on how good you are at them.
Yeah, so I mean, if you're really good, then you can probably end up with a figurine for a lot less than you would just pay for it at the store. But I mean, I watched a few tutorials on YouTube before our last trip, and I was gonna try to get a nice figure from a crane machine. I couldn't. I was not good enough. So really, whether it saves you money or not just kind of depends on your own luck and skill. I mean, some people are good enough at it that they'll go and win a bunch of them from a UFO catcher and then resell them at a secondhand shop. So that brings us to our next topic. If you're no good at UFO catchers, and chances are most of us aren't, the next place to look are used goods stores that specialize in anime merchandise. My hands down favorite is Mandarake. It's actually a chain with over a dozen locations located throughout Japan. And they sell a ton of figures and manga and art books and all sorts of stuff.
And so everything that Mandarake sells is pre-owned, but as such it's reasonably priced, and most of the time, the longer it's there, they start reducing prices. Although obviously rare things might start pretty high and go higher. And so they actually, unlike a lot of other places, Mandarake actually has an online store in English, and you can actually sort of browse prices and items at specific locations there. And I think they also operate an auction site, or they did for a while.
I think they still do.
They still do.
I've never used the auction site. I've just only ever bought outright from them. But
and there's also other interesting things that they have on location, like at the stores, like life-size figures, and all sorts of things when you walk through there you probably didn't actually even know existed.
So besides Mandarake, you can also, once again, check out Hard Off or Hobby Off or one of the other off stores. Some of them, especially in large cities, might have a decent selection of anime goods, like figurines and other stuff. So the photo on the left here shows a special edition Sakura Wars Dreamcast that I found that was being sold at a off-home location in Hokkaido. The same one I mentioned
for
before.
For a lot of money, but it was also rare, so, you know.
Yeah, so it's just an example that you can find anime merchandise or anime-themed merchandise at these secondhand stores as well. So on this slide, we have some examples of some of the used items that Adam and I, but mostly me because I'm the figure collector, have bought in Japan over the years. With a comparison of their original or like retail price versus what I actually paid for them. And you can see that buying used can really get you some good deals.
So one thing we don't mention here is that, of course, you have to be able to take the stuff that you buy back with you. And so, you know, planning ahead and making sure that you have an empty suitcase that won't cost you anything extra to, you know.
Bring 2 suitcases.
Yeah.
Pack one empty suitcase inside the other. And then you can put all your figurines in there. And
yeah, so make sure you think about how much it's going to cost to bring stuff back before you go and buy it.
Yeah, check with your airline how many checked bags and what the weight limit is that you can check for free. I think lately, most of the time, it's 2 checked bags up to 50 pounds, but it's subject to change.
Yeah, and well, also oftentimes there's the scale before you check in at the airline, and you can rearrange your bag so that you can, you know, be under the weight limit per bag if you need to.
Evenly distribute the weight, yeah. Okay, so we're getting near to the end of the program here. So let's take a look at just kind of how much overall a trip to Japan would cost.
Just as some examples.
Yeah, we're going to go over one example budget, and then also we're going to review the actual budget that Adam and I spent for our 2019 trip.
So here's a hypothetical budget for a 7-day trip for a single person. So we included airfare at $800 here, and a national JR pass, which is, you know, for convenience, but depending on the rest of your itinerary, it could also save you a substantial amount of money. This also includes some money for subway, and then also a hostel or a business hotel for 10,000 per day and 500 yen per meal for food. And so obviously 500 yen per meal isn't going to get you the greatest meal of your life, but for a week, you know, you could get by, and of course you could also trade off, you know, the 10,000 for lodging. You know, you could actually find something less than that. So
yeah, I mean, you could go lower on the accommodations and up, you know, higher on the food. It's kind of up to you. This is just sort of an example of like, this is a trip you could actually do if you wanted to.
Yeah. So
this brings your daily cost to about $115 per day, or a total cost of $1,895. So just under $2,000 for the total trip. And it's a lot of money, but it's not bad for Japan, for some place that's so far away. And consider the fact here that about half that total cost is just for the airfare. So a longer vacation kind of makes the airfare more worthwhile. So each day you could add on to this trip would cost another $115. So depending on how much money you have to spend, it may be possible and sort of more money efficient to do a longer trip. And just to mention for reference, a tourist visa gets you a maximum of a 90-day stay. So here's an outline of what we spent on our trip in 2019. And so we spent 14 days where we visited a few cities, actually, Tokyo, Sapporo in Hokkaido, and Osaka. And so all the costs here are actually for covering 2 people. And if you're traveling alone, you can
reduce this a bit more in some cases.
So we flew out of the Toronto airport instead of Rochester because we had a friend flying with us, and the airfare was a little cheaper from Toronto during that time period.
So it's actually worth driving from Rochester to Toronto and flying out of Toronto.
Yeah, it would have saved him a considerable amount of money, so we did that. As mentioned previously, we mainly used airline miles to cover our own flights for this trip. We did have to buy about $400 in airline miles, and we also paid some money in fuel surcharges, so our overall airfare cost was $524 for the two of us combined. But once again, if airfare is typically $800 or more per person, that's really good.
So I had actually used my ANA miles to purchase tickets on Air Canada, which is a partner airline in Star Alliance, which got us from Toronto to Tokyo, and then we flew domestic from Tokyo to Sapporo in Hokkaido, and then we flew again domestically from Sapporo to Osaka. So we had a total of 2 domestic flights each, and so those domestic flights were on Japan Airlines, and we got the Japan Airlines Explorer fare for a total of $413. And then we also got a JR pass for the Kansai area. We were going between Osaka and other cities like Himeji and Nara. And then to get from Osaka back to Tokyo, we took the Shinkansen, the bullet train, and that wasn't covered under the regional JR pass that we got, so we used a special discount Shinkansen ticket, which was the Platte Kodama ticket, which was good for the Kodama Shinkansen, which cost $194 for both of us, and in total our fares for subways are probably a little less than $300. It would have been more convenient for us to get national JR passes instead of the regional pass, but then that also would have cost substantially more money. So we traded some convenience for some, about $300 in this case.
Yeah, it was a little annoying getting the regional pass and the Shinkansen ticket and individual subway fares, but it was worth it. We traveled with 2 friends on this trip, so we flew out with one friend and then we met up with a second friend in the country. So our hotel costs were split between all of us. So across all 14 days, we only spent about $719 for the 2 of us. So in other words, about $51 per night for the 2 of us. And finally, our food costs were somewhere around about $560-ish for the 2 of us over the course of the trip. We didn't go through and total up every single food receipt we had from this trip, but just based on money in the bank before and after.
Yeah, we also didn't because one of my friends on this trip hadn't been to Japan before. We didn't try too hard to save money on food actually, because we were trying to go to some interesting places and especially ramen and such. So our grand total for this was somewhere around $2,834, and this doesn't include souvenirs and other admission fees to places we went to. But for 14 days for 2 people, less than $3,000 really isn't too bad, and especially if you have friends that you can split your hotel with, and you can maybe even then get a bigger room in a nicer place and split it and still have it be affordable.
So $3,000 is still a lot of money. We're not trying to say it's not, but it's feasible. And I mean, honestly, for Japan, you might not really get much better than that. So visiting Japan can be possible. It can be within your means if you're careful and take advantage of every deal you can and are able to, save some money and set some money aside for it. So it can be done. So that's our show. thank you for tuning in, for joining us today on the stream.
Yeah, hopefully you all stay safe out there, and so we can all eventually go back to traveling.
So have fun on your future travels to Japan.